I was interested in doing advance because I just think it's embarrassing how few women there are on our stages, in films, on television. I mean, I play a game with myself when I'm on the tube, and I look at posters for films, and I get a point every time there is a woman who is either the primary focus of the poster, so Helen Mirren's doing well at the moment, or when there are more than two women on the poster, and I lose all those points if any of those women are just wearing a bikini. And it's amazing how hard it is to score points on that game. You know, it really, I've always personally been drawn to I sort of realised that I've kind of been doing not just advanced, but running the game particularly, and having more choice over the kind of work that I make. But I've always been drawn to stories that have female protagonists. You know, whether it was when I was a kid, I was reading The Worst Witch, or being well into Buffy the Vampire Slayer as a student, or I rewatched Aliens the other day, and it's just such an extraordinary. Ripley is an absolutely extraordinary character, and so I've always sort of had that kind of natural interest at a sort of artistic level for female characters. And then when I'm programming the gate, it's astonishing how often you can find yourself reading a play and really liking it, and only sort of realizing halfway through that there are no women in it. When I programmed the season These American Lives, which had 3 shows in it, one of them was Grounded, which is a play by an American writer, George Brandt, about a female drone pilot, and it was a solo show, and that was obviously that. But then the other 2 shows were great shows, No Place to Go and The Body of an American. But it was only after I programmed the whole season I realised that of the 7 performers that would appear on stage, 6 of them were white men, and all 3 of the shows had been written by white men, even Grounded. And that's not to criticise any of those shows. I mean, they were great plays, and they were successful shows. But I was sort of shocked at myself, given how focused I usually am on representation within the work, how suddenly, when you sort of take your eye off the ball, how you just go back to this default of the white man as being the primary way through which you tell any story. And I just think that's really boring, beyond anything else, aside from questions about the politics of representation, or access to the industry, or race, or gender, or class, or whatever. It's just really, really boring that it's always white men that are used to tell stories. And so I think what drew me to advance was the opportunity to sort of talk about, with other theatre makers, talk about how we can kind of subvert that and change that, and make work that is politically more progressive, because it calls on a much wider range of voices, but also more interesting artistically, because it presents a wider range of experience. Yeah, I think advance really did help progress with that aspiration, because I think that it kind of, in one way, it was kind of good to sort of be able to realise what we're doing right, and it's also really good to kind of be able to really think carefully about the mistakes that we've made, or areas that we need to improve in, and just constantly having that dialogue, both within the theatre between my executive director Claire and myself, and the rest of our team, talking about it, and then talking about it within the away days with other organisations. It sort of kind of literally raises awareness, so then it becomes part of your sort of the sort of daily grammar of running a theatre, and that naturally impacts then upon your thinking around programming, around how you put your creative teams together, and inevitably we built a number of relationships, either strengthening relationships that we already had. So I had some big admirer of Sue Emmis at the Young Vic, and she was involved, so I was talking to her a lot about this and building our conversation about that, or building new relationships with theatres or with academic institutions or whatever, to sort of look at how we can tackle these questions more fundamentally. So, yeah. For a sort of practical and a philosophical reason. The practical reason being that in terms of other theatres are focusing on playwrights and so on, and actually I think we're not so bad on that. I mean, we're not amazing, but we're not so bad. But I think industry-wide, I say we as in the Gate specifically, but I think industry-wide, it's just an objective fact that there are very, very few women who do lighting and sound design. And so that was the practical thing. It just seemed to me that that was an obvious area, and perhaps not the most kind of glamorous area to look at. You know, it's not like the writer or the actor, you know, the people that we, you know, the faces and names we recognise. But also sort of philosophically, because there is this cliche, which may or may not be true, that men tend to be more drawn to jobs that involve plugs and buttons. You know, most stage managers you work with are women, overwhelmingly women. I've only ever once worked with a male stage manager. But most lighting and sound designers are men, and so I was interested in fundamentally the question of, is there a problem? Is it a problem that there are a majority of men? If it's just the case that there aren't many women that want to do that job in the first place, does it really matter that then there aren't that many women doing it? Or is it the case that there aren't many women that want to do that because of sort of social and cultural conditioning, because of there are women that want to do it, but there are barriers to them getting in. So it's sort of both. It's that practical and that philosophical aspect that I sort of found interesting. And then, you know, a lot of the research that you did in terms of speaking to people who run courses at drama schools in lighting and sound design, and that was really fascinating, hearing the results of that and the different way that male and female students would present themselves. I tell you, the other thing that's interesting is that when you look at it through the prism of sort of training institutions like drama schools or universities, that already becomes quite self-selective at a level of social class, because only certain people can afford to go to university. So actually looking much more fundamentally at the different ways into that kind of job, particularly when that job requires very particular skills. It's not like being a director where you can just sort of make it up as you go along. You know, with a lighting designer, you do need to know the difference between a park out and a Fresnel. So I think as we kind of build this program to sort of see if we can create more opportunities for women in those areas, I think we'll learn a lot more about what the answers to the original questions that we were exploring were, and what the other barriers are that there are to entry alongside gender, you know, sort of ethnicity or class or whatever. So I think that project will generate a lot of its own answers in the